This is part two of a series. We take messages and kind of lump them into a series of messages so that we can kind of see where we are, and we talk about it for a few weeks and kind of beat it to death, and then we move on to something else. And so this week we're in part two, meaning you might have missed last week, but let me just catch us back up. We've been talking about the idea of faith, but that faith isn't an accident. Faith is actually by design. And here's why we know this, because faith was actually God's idea in the very beginning. Faith was the idea. From the very beginning, when God created Adam and Eve and placed them in the garden, faith in that moment became the automatic communication tool, the automatic language that we needed to speak as created beings in order to relate to and be in a relationship with God. It's just like, that's the way it is. Faith was not an accidental response to sin. Oh, well, Adam and Eve messed it up and they sinned and they got us into a bit of a pickle, and so God had to go to plan B. And so I guess, I'll make it like a faith thing. No, that's not the way it works. Faith actually was the intention from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, you cannot be in a relationship with God without faith. It requires faith. In fact, this is how important it is. Faith is the requirement of anything that is not God, me and everybody else and everything else that's ever been created, anything that is not God, in order to be in a relationship with God. In other words, if you want to be in a relationship with the creator of the universe, it requires faith. Why is that? Because faith is about professing dependence and trust on something else, not yourself. When you don't do that, when you are not willing to lean into God and to place your faith in God, ultimately you're competing with God. And that causes you to not be right with God and to not be in a relationship with God. So you can imagine, we believe that faith is really that important, that faith is the vehicle that propels us into a relationship with God. So that's where we started last week, saying that faith is by design because it was God's idea. Not an accident, not plan B. This was the plan, the only plan from the beginning, faith. It is by design. But today, I don't want to just talk about the origin of faith. I want to talk about the object of our faith. What is the object of our faith? What is it that we're actually propped up against? In other words, and this is something we don't think about a lot, but we need to today. That's the goal of this. If you say that you have faith in God, what is it leaned against? What's holding it up? In other words, I should have a question in there next. Is there not a question next? Nope. So the question is, what is your faith leaning against? So is that later on, maybe? I just want to get this right. I don't want to miss this. But let me just go ahead and say, faith is leaning into something. And I just want to ask you, what is it really? Is it leaned up against your circumstances, or is it leaned into your Heavenly Father? Because there's a big difference. Because see, I think and what I want to mention to you today is that there's a lot of us, I would say all of us at some point in our lives are tempted to allow our faith to drift into the direction of leaning against our circumstances. And this is why I call this circumstantial faith. That's not, that's more of kind of a made-up thing. It's not like a Bible thing. But essentially that's circumstantial faith. And let me describe what that looks like. Circumstantial faith is saying, okay, so I believe in God. I believe in God, and what I believe about God is based on my own ability to interpret and to be aware of the situations and the circumstances in my life and the things that are happening around me. That's what circumstantial faith is. In other words, I'm basing it on my circumstances. And so my view of God and what I believe about God and what I believe God can and can't do is based on what I see happening around me. I mean, isn't that the kind of faith that we see so often? And we all struggle with this sometimes. But the problem with that kind of faith is that it is extremely fragile. But I mean, oh goodness, like this is culture. This is like the culture leaning of faith. I mean, we lean into this all the time. Why is it so fragile? Well, because life is inconsistent. Life is not consistent. And so all the time there are ebbs and flows and there are ups and downs and there are things that happen in your life that you, weren't planning on. And I thought it was going to go this way, or I expected God to do this, or I thought, bad things couldn't happen to good people, right? And those kind of things happen and our faith begins to crumble because our faith is leaning into our circumstances and our ability to interpret them. And we're not really good at interpreting circumstances. I mean, am I right? We're not always really good at it. We don't always get it right. Man, if you remember being a teenager, we didn't always interpret our circumstances the right way and know what was good for us and what was right and what was best. And man, we just have a tendency to do that. Life is inconsistent. That's one of the reasons that this is such a dangerous way to have faith. But also because we interpret circumstances based on our own personal experiences. In other words, the way that you were raised, what your childhood was like, the type of parents that you had, the type of home environment that you had, it affects that. The kind of things that cause you fear or your insecurities are kind of becomes part of that filter. Maybe your education, the things that you were taught. Maybe the group of friends that you have and how much influence they have on you and what they believe about something or what they do and how they live their life. And those things begin to influence us. And it leans us and it moves us. And as long as our faith continues to lean on those things and the circumstances of life, then it will always remain extremely fragile. It causes us doubt. We look around and we see, we grew up a certain way, and then those things didn't really begin to add up as we became an adult. And our adult faith just didn't match our kid faith. And so it crumbled. Because it was a circumstantial faith. And here's the real problem. There are at least two things that are the most destructive and can erode faith more quickly than anything else. Your lifestyle decisions and unexplained circumstances. Let me give you a couple examples. Your lifestyle decisions, consider this. Maybe you grew up in the kind of home, it's just a scenario, maybe you grew up in the kind of home where you were taught that sex is supposed to be just for marriage, that it's saved for marriage, and so that's just what you believed. But then you got a little bit older and you realize not everybody believes that. And matter of fact, most people really don't, and they certainly don't live that way. Even Christians that grew up believing the same thing, and it's like, I don't really understand that. And they believe differently, they behave differently, and so you begin to question it. Well, then to make matters worse, you became interested in that girl or that guy who also didn't believe like you. And you had a decision to make. Well, instead of abandoning that relationship, what did you do? You reshaped your faith to fit your circumstance. You just allowed it to mold a little bit. And your faith now was at the mercy of your lifestyle decisions. It's faith based on circumstances. That is circumstantial faith. Or maybe you grew up in a home where you just learned to believe that God loves everybody, that He cares for everybody. You were always taught that. You went to church and that God is all powerful and that He is all knowing and He knows everything. But then you got older and you started watching the news and paying attention to what's going on around the world. And you see all of the pain and the struggles and the hardships, and you see bad things happening to good people, and it doesn't make sense to you. It doesn't seem to add up. And so you just realize one day that you just don't believe in God anymore, because He's not doing what you expected Him to do. That just doesn't add up. I don't understand. And so your faith in God, instead of being based on what you know about God, is now based on what you see happening around you. It's a circumstantial faith. And here's the thing. We are all susceptible to this. We all have an element of circumstantial faith in our lives. We are all susceptible and tempted to lean our faith, to prop our faith up against the things that we see happening around us. Let me illustrate this. I need some people. I need Walt. I need Nick and Leroy. Hunter, you're next. Y'all come on up. Yeah, I need you up here in the light. You don't even need a mic. You're not even going to have to talk. Aren't these some good-looking men? All right, Leroy. I need you to stand right here. I need you to face that way. This is Leroy. And Leroy is representing you and me. He represents our faith in God, what we believe. He's looking that direction. And let me have Nick over here. And Nick, I just want you to stand behind him and put your hands right here. Now, here's what I want you to do, Leroy. How far, if you keep your body straight, how far are you willing to trust Nick in leaning back?
Pretty far.
You want to give it a try?
Sure.
You going to stand still?
Yeah.
Nick, you feeling strong? Notice I did not do this. All right. Well, let's see. Let's just see what you got.
All right.
Just let him go. Let's see how far he's willing to trust you. You good? Oh, that's pretty good though, right? You willing to do more?
I know what you're about to put Walt behind.
Why do you say that?
I don't know.
Give it a try. That's Nick. I promise. All right, Walt. Hands right here. Okay. He's got some muscles. How far are you willing to go?
Walt pushed me.
How far? Okay. Let me just put your hands here. This is our faith, and this represents our circumstances. This represents the things in our lives that we think our faith is based in, but it's fragile. It ultimately and very easily is going to crumble under the weight of our faith. Because we've got this big faith, we say we believe in who God is, but then we base it in our circumstances, and it doesn't prop it up very well. And real quickly, Leroy's going to find himself wiped out on the ground, not believing in who God is. Thanks, guys. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah. Your faith will always be fragile. And you ready for this? Your faith in God will always be fragile and always susceptible to falling and to crumbling as long as it is based and propped up against the circumstances of life and your ability to interpret them. But you're not the only ones. This has been something that's been going around since the beginning of time. Everybody has always struggled. This is a people thing. Everybody has struggled with this, whether you're a believer or not. Whether it's a Christian faith or just some philosophy of yours. You believe in something. You have faith in something. Whether it's a philosophy or another religion, you believe in something. Whether maybe it's even in yourself. But your faith is only as strong as what's holding it up is able to hold it up. And if this isn't very strong, then your faith is going to crumble very quickly. The people of Israel were no exception. They learned this. And yet, they had spent literally hundreds and hundreds of years of watching God's faithfulness to them over and over and over again. Even when they would rebel, they would run away, they would do dumb things, and yet God was there and He was faithful, and He's the one that they would tell stories. There was oral tradition. And then they began writing these things down and reminding themselves of all that God had done. Do you remember when, that time? If you've ever forgotten, kids, about who God is and what He can do, just remember when He brought Moses and the people of Israel out of Egypt after hundreds of years of slavery. And He didn't just do it in anything that you can explain. This was like the unexplainable. It had to be God. It was unbelievable. And He brought them out with a mighty hand. And then He's the one that has always walked with us. And then they would write songs about it and sing about it. They would call them psalms. We call them these kind of worship songs, right? We stand up and we sing about who God is and how faithful He is. Don't we do that? That's what we just did. And the people of Israel were no different. This has always been something that people of faith do. Why? It's not just to remind God. He knows He's faithful. It's to remind us. It's to say, God, this is what I believe. That's what a song does. Psalm 44 does this so well. It's just a reminder, hey, God, we just remember who you were. Look at what is recorded in Psalm 44. We have heard it with our ears. We've heard of this, oh God. Our ancestors have told us what you did in their days, in days long ago. We remember, we're reflecting on this, and we want to sing it. We want to sing about it, not because you need reminding, but because we do. Look at this. With what? Your hand, you drove out the nations and planted our ancestors. You crushed the peoples and made our ancestors flourish. You did it. Look at this. It was not by their sword, the Israelites of old, that they won the land, nor did their arm bring them victory. What was it? It was your right hand. It was your arm and the light of your face, for you loved them. I love that. I mean, the Israelites are just reminding one another, hey, don't you remember? Every time they sang this, look what God has done. It wasn't on our account. It wasn't because we were so strong. They just recognized, even though they couldn't see it, this wasn't about seeing as believing. We talked about that last week. They just knew that something miraculous had happened. And what did they do? They attributed it to God because they trusted in God's promises. They attributed their victory to God, not because they couldn't explain it somehow without bringing God into the picture, but simply because they trusted God. They had faith in God. And so they leaned into it. It wasn't us, it was you. It was your hand. It was your face. It was by your strength and your mighty arm. And because you loved them, because you love us. But then look at this, verse 9. Look what changes. But now you have rejected and humbled us. What's interesting is they actually talk about, and it's like they, all of a sudden needed to remind God, they talk about how they've been faithful. We don't deserve this. We're going through a time of unparalleled persecution right now. Something crazy is happening. It's probably just before the exile. And so things had not gone well for at least 100 or so years, a couple of 100 years at this point. And they were a little bit of a complaint. Isn't that interesting? They were reminded of who God is. Hey, look what he's done. Isn't it amazing? But God, we've not done anything. We've not rebelled. We've not gone astray. God, I've not done anything. Where are you? Why have you rejected us? What did they do? They looked at their circumstances and they said, based on what I see happening around us and based on who we believe God to be, you must not be aware of what's going on. God must not be present. God must not be here because this is not in your character, God. I don't understand. We've not done anything wrong. And so they begin to cry out. Verse 23. Awake, Lord. Awake, Lord. You ever felt that way? God, where are you? You ever? Come on. Awake, Lord. Why do you sleep? Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face? Because obviously you must be hiding your face and forget our misery and our oppression. They continue. We are brought down to the dust. Our bodies cling to the ground. Rise up and help us. And notice what they say. Save us. Rescue us. They knew what he could do. Rescue us because of your unfailing love. Isn't this crazy? I mean, they went from, we know what God has done in the past, but now it just doesn't seem like we deserve this terrible, like we're good people, why are bad things happening? So wake up. Clearly, you must be snoozing. Or you're just unaware, kind of a, little bit of a slap in the face. It's like, God, can we just remind you of our circumstance? Can we just tell you about how bad things are right now? We just need to remind you of that. Things are not going well the way that we intended and anticipated, and so maybe you're just nowhere around, and perhaps their faith in God began to erode, maybe even unintentionally. And this continued to be the case until finally one day Jesus showed up on the scene hundreds of years later. And things began to change. And Matthew records for us this eerily similar circumstance one afternoon when Jesus was with his disciples. And Jesus had been healing people and doing amazing things, been performing miracles, and he had walked on water, and now he was he was casting out evil spirits, and he was spending time with his disciples, and he was teaching them. And then they decided to go across. This part of his ministry was around the north side of the Sea of Galilee, if you've ever looked at a map of Israel. And they were getting ready to travel to the other side. And several of the disciples are like experienced fishermen. It's like their family business. They've been doing this a long time. So they've been sailing for a long time. Jesus, he's from the inland. He was from Nazareth. He was a carpenter. That's what he did. He knows nothing about this stuff. But they get on the boat, they follow Jesus onto the boat, and they begin to go to the other side. And here's what happens. He got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and suddenly a furious storm, you probably heard this before, suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake. So that the waves swept up. This wasn't like, a strong wind. This was a storm. So much so that the waves were sweeping over the boat. I don't know if nuh-uh. Okay, first of all, I ain't gonna be on the boat. But definitely not during something like this. That's high up there with nightmare for me, okay? But Jesus was sleeping. But Jesus was snoozing. What kind of exhaustion must Jesus have been experiencing to be sleeping while this was going on? You ever wondered that if you've ever read this story? It's like, seriously? Sleeping? Like waves are like pouring onto him. The ups and the downs. I mean, this thing snuck up on them, but it's not like they saw it coming and they tried to wake Jesus up. The way Matthew describes it is that the storm was actually pushing waves onto and into the boat, and Jesus was sleeping. Now, here's the thing. I mean, come on. Was Jesus really sleeping? And again, this is me. I'm going to read between some lines here. Jesus is laying down. He's got his head, nowhere to lay his head. He had just talked about the cost of discipleship just a few lines before this. And he's laying down in the boat, and waves are hitting him. And I can just imagine Jesus going, It's like, because he wasn't concerned, clearly, But I doubt he was actually sleeping. I think he was allowing this moment to test faith. I wonder what my guys are going to do. I wonder how they're going to respond to this. Because they're going to see what? The wind and the waves and the circumstances of life, the things that are difficult, and they're going to pay attention to those things, and they're going to wonder, are we going to die? Where is their faith going to lie? Are they going to put their faith in their ability to just manhandle that boat and get them through the storm? Or are they going to lean into me? Because see, I think we read this the wrong way sometimes. I think the disciples actually exercised a good bit of faith here. Because what did they do? They went to Jesus. They didn't go kick him in the side and say, "What are you doing? Could you come pull that rope over there?" It wasn't like, just get up and help us navigate this storm. They go to Jesus. The disciples went and they woke him up. That's how it's described. Saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Lord, save us." I think there was a little bit of faith there. I don't think Jesus' concern was so much that they didn't have faith. It's just that their faith was in the wrong thing. That's really an expression of faith, isn't it? To cry out finally and to look up and to say, hey, there is a God, to say, hey, Lord, save us. Something's going on. They didn't really have a full understanding of who he was, but enough so that they could say, Lord, save us. And Jesus stirs enough to say, you of like he hadn't done anything yet. It's still in the midst of it. And he's like, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? I don't think this is so much an accusation as just a statement. You of little faith. Hey guys of little faith, why are you so afraid? You know what I think? I think the statement here is that little faith can do amazing things. I don't think the issue is that, well, why do you not have big faith? Because that's the way we read that. It's like, oh gosh, I don't know. Like, I don't want to have big faith. I'd be scared too. Yeah, that's a normal human response. Of course, we can be scared to death in the middle of a storm. I think there were a few of you that were experiencing that a couple of weeks ago when you were in the middle of the ocean on a cruise liner. You were on a cruise, and it was scary. Middle of a hurricane, some kind of storm. And they were talking about it, and it's like, scared to death. I thought that was going to be the end. Why not? I mean, of course we are. The question wasn't that gosh, you lack faith in a general sense. I think they just lacked faith in Jesus. The problem wasn't their lack of faith, but the focus of their faith. I don't think it was that they lacked faith. Jesus even said, "You have little faith." Didn't at one point he say, even faith the size of a mustard seed can do amazing things, can say to that mountain, you move over here? I mean, isn't that what just a little bit of faith can do? The issue wasn't the size of their faith. The issue was the focus of their faith. What's it propped up against? That's a question for you and me. So then Jesus got up. I can just imagine it very casually. Got up, rebuked the wind, bad wind and waves. And it was completely calm. And the men were amazed, and they asked, what kind of man is this? A mighty good man. Mighty good man. Even the wind, ignore that. Even the winds and the waves obey him. It was miracles like these that caused the disciples to learn more and more about who Jesus really was and what he was capable of. But it was not really until the death, burial, and then the subsequent resurrection of Jesus that they really got it, that they really understood that Jesus really is God, that he put on flesh clothes and he came to be among us, that Jesus really is the Son of God. He is God himself. That's who Jesus is. That's when they began to believe that. And that is why when we read through the New Testament, story after story after story, we see people, Christians, just simple people, normal people, not people of great, amazing faith, but just people who exhibited unbelievable, bold faith. Because their faith was in the fact that Jesus was who he said he was, and that he could do what he promised he could do. That's why they had so much confidence, even in the midst of extreme persecution in the first century. It's amazing the things that they had to put up with, the things that they had to deal with. People being, at the very least, families being separated, thrown into jail, ultimately being stoned to death, being run through with a sword, some being crucified on a cross, burned at a stake, oil put on their heads while they were still alive and placed inside a little cage inside of Nero's garden and lit on fire as torches. I mean, that's what people were dealing with, and it's what led some of the writers of the New Testament books to write letters to these people, and one of them was the author of Hebrews, and he writes to Jewish Christians, specifically to Hebrews, writes to these Jewish Christians to remind them of who God is. Let me just remind you, like Psalm 44, like songs we just sang, let me remind you, wait a minute, of who God is. And in chapter 11, we call it the faith chapter, and it's because he's reminding them of all the people who had gone before them who had exhibited faith. Not big faith, but faith focused on the right thing. They still had doubts. They still had concerns. They still messed up. They did things the wrong way. But their faith, it wasn't that their faith was great. Make sure we understand that today. It's not that they had great faith. They just had faith that was focused on Jesus. And so the author of Hebrews gets to the end of that chapter, and then he begins to reveal the secret. Here's the secret, not to circumstantial faith, but real faith. Therefore, since we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, the people who have gone before us, who exhibited unbelievable faith, since we've got all these people who expressed faith and lived their lives accordingly, even though they never actually saw promises fulfilled, they still had faith in God. Let us then throw off everything that hinders. In other words, intentionally get rid of the baggage. Get rid of the things, whatever it is, that's causing you to lean into anything but God, anything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles. Get rid of that stuff. Quit allowing your faith to lean in that direction. And instead, let us run with perseverance. Here's how you're going to do it. Here's how you're going to fix your faith. Run with perseverance the race that's been marked out for us. How? Read these 3 words. How? Let's say that loud together. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. The pioneer as in the author, the origin, suggesting that Jesus actually was God and faith was God's idea, which means it was Jesus' idea in the very beginning. He pioneered it. He came up with it. You can have it because this is the way that you are to be in a relationship with me. But I'm also the perfecter of faith. I'm the beginning of faith, but I'm also the end. I'm the object. I'm the origin of faith. I'm also the object of faith. Place your faith in me. No matter how big or small you think it is, just make sure that it's leaning into me and who I am. Not into your ability to interpret your circumstances and the stuff that's going on around you and all the people that are making different kinds of decisions and the direction culture is leaning. I want you to lean into me. Just lean into me. I don't understand what's going on. Lean into me. But I just don't see how this could be. Quit looking that way. Lean into me. The object of our faith is a person. The object of our faith is not our problems. It's not our pain. It's not a program that you're in. It's not even your perspective. The problem is that our faith should be focused on a person. The object of our faith is a person. So you ready for this? So you want to know how to fix this? The fix for your faith is found in your focus. The fix for your faith is found in your focus. You know, it's not a force or a formula. I think some people think it is. Well, as long as I can kind of figure God out, you know, it's kind of this magical thing. You know, it's like we treat faith, and we're all kind of guilty of this sometimes. We treat faith like it's like this magical force or power. And if we just kind of concentrate hard enough and have enough faith, well, you just need to pray with more faith, brother. Well, if you have enough faith, then we can actually move the hand of God into doing our bidding. You know what that is? Magic. That's Harry Potter stuff. It's not a force to be utilized, and so I can make God do what I need to do. It's also not a formula, like it's a code that you put into your phone, and as long as I get all the pieces right and in the right order, then I can get God to do what I need him to do. As long as I pray and I fast and give, let me throw in some church attendance, you know, or wait, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's as long as I go to church, 3 Sundays a month, maybe 2, and I pray more and I stop cussing, then maybe God will begin to do. No. Faith is not a formula. It's not complicated. Faith is simple. Why? Faith is a focus. Faith is a focus. What are you looking at? It's a focus on the person of Jesus. Faith is a focus on the person of Jesus. Let me just ask a quick question. What's holding you back? What is the stuff that so easily entangles? What is it? Let me just have Leroy and Nick one more time. I mean, you can just box squat up here if you want. No, don't really. I was just kidding. That made my back hurt. Leroy didn't just want to do like a barrel roll on the stage. Perfect, right there. Leroy? So how do you change your focus? Oh, that was easy. Now, prop your hands there. How much more willing are you to trust in what's holding you up?
More. A lot more.
Let's give it a try. Might have to do a deep squat there, Nick. Let him rest on you there. Look at that. Come on. You know what he did? He fixed his focus on the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. He just stopped looking that way and looked this way. I think when Jesus was in the boat with those disciples, he was saying, wait, why are you looking at the wind and the waves when you could be looking at me? I know it's crazy and I know we could drown, but good gracious, you're with me. You've got me. And I'm faithful to keep my promises. And as long as you continue to keep your eyes fixed on me, your faith will not fail, no matter what. Your eyes can remain fixed on Jesus, and your faith, not about being big faith, not, I have this incredible faith. Just fix your gaze on Jesus. Stop looking around. It's what happened to Peter when he got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. What happened? You read that story in a while? When he looked around and he saw the strong wind and the height of the waves, he began to sink because he took his gaze off of Jesus. We're all tempted to do that. You'll be tempted today, like every day. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. In the area of your finances, in your relationships, at work, in your career, with your kids, something's going to happen. And as long as your faith is leaning up against anything other than Jesus, it's going to fall. So I have a challenge for each one of us today. Those of you who know Jesus, those of you who don't, those of you who feel like, I've been struggling with this, I've just got a little bit of faith, I don't have much. For those of you, for every single one of us, this is my challenge. Turn your eyes upon Jesus.